still talking about football?
Yeah, but tell NFC North.
Then let's talk football.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Headed North, an NFC North podcast, and I am your host, D-Tron. And we're back. This is officially the kickoff of Season 2 of the Headed North podcast. We're trying to add an element this year, so if you are watching us on YouTube, on the YouTube channel at Headed North Podcast, we appreciate it. You get some of the video and reaction, some of the visual for what I'm over here doing in my studio when I'm recording this show for you. If you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other streaming platform, thank you for joining us. I'd like to just reintroduce the show really quickly if you are new to the show. This podcast is all about the NFC North. So that's your Detroit Lions, your Chicago Bears, Minnesota Vikings, and Green Bay Packers. If you don't want to hear about the NFC North, I suggest you don't tune in because that's all we really talk about. I want you to know how much I care passionately for the Detroit Lions, but I also want you to know that I'm going to treat each of the teams in the division fairly, except for Green Bay. I don't like them very much. I take it back. I'm going to try my best to treat everyone fairly. But I love the fact that you found the show, and since you did, please tell somebody about it. We're still a relatively new show. Would appreciate all the support that you guys can give us. Thanks for the comments, likes. If you follow or subscribe, we really do appreciate it. All right, now that we got all of that out of the way, it has been a wild offseason so far already, and I mean, really, there's only been free agency. That's it. We haven't even got to the draft yet. And already, we don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be in Chicago. We don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be in Minnesota. There's a lot happening in the division so far this year. And I can't wait to get into it, but I can't fit everything in today's show. And so, what we're going to focus on is getting caught up. We want to talk about the main story, the big thing going on with each of the teams right now. We'll talk a little bit about who they added, who's been subtracted, and maybe a sub-story or two within each team before we wrap up today's episode. And then over the next couple of weeks, we'll give you guys some draft analysis, some needs for each of the teams, and give you some predictions of where we believe folks will get drafted. All of that and more on today's episode of Headed North Podcast. Again, this is the first episode of Season 2. We made it, and it's time to talk football again. All right, so the very first story that we're going to get kicked off with is probably the biggest story that has happened in the North, and honestly, it's one of the biggest stories that have happened in the NFL in the free agency, and that is Kirk Cousins is no longer with the Minnesota Vikings. He is now officially an AT alien. Look, Kirk Cousins got a $180 million contract from Atlanta, coming off of an injury, by the way. Whoo boy, Kirk saw that check and there was no way you could turn that down. Minnesota couldn't do that for him, especially not with their plans to eventually re-sign Justin Jefferson. There was just no way that they were going to give Kirk anything close to what Atlanta was going to give him. And it feels like Atlanta overpaid. This Kirk Cousins story is crazy because at the end of it all, if Kirk plays out this whole contract, gets paid all of it, and granted, he's got a lot that's guaranteed. He's getting $50 million at signing. He's getting $100 million guaranteed over 24 and 25, and then another couple 10 or 20 million on those last the last 3 or 4 years of his contract. So he's getting a ton of money guaranteed. But this is an overpay for Atlanta, and I get it. They're coming off of a season where the quarterback play really hindered them. But giving Kirk that much money, he's going to end up having more. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Kirk Cousins is going to have gotten paid more in his contracts than the great Tom Brady. Someone who has rings on rings on rings, and Kirk Cousins has like a single playoff win. And his career earnings are going to exceed that of Tom Brady and just about everybody else. That is a wild thing to think about. But you know what? That is somebody else's problem now. Minnesota's problem is going to be whether or not they need to re-up Justin Jefferson and for how much. I mean, I got my my monitor back here with all of my stats in case you're watching the YouTube. If you're listening to us, skip this part. So you've got Justin Jefferson, who honestly is probably going to be the highest paid wide receiver in the league and potentially pushing highest paid player in the league. And right now, the number one paid wide receiver is Devontae Adams. And Devontae Adams is getting like $140 million. That's a lot. They're getting ready to pay Justin Jefferson. I don't know, man. He could set the market at $180, $200 million because he is just that dominant when he plays. But if you're Minnesota, do you do that? That's a lot of money to play a wide receiver, to pay anybody that's not a quarterback. If you do that, you are banking that Justin Jefferson can single-handedly get your franchise into the playoffs, into the Super Bowl. And I don't think that's true. Again, being a Detroit Lions fan, it wouldn't surprise you that I would like for them to get rid of Justin Jefferson. But I would get rid of Justin Jefferson. I would leverage Justin Jefferson, let someone else pay him, and get a fortune for him in return. Because right now, feels like a rebuild. And I know it doesn't seem like that for Minnesota because they went out and acquired a bunch of folks in this offseason already. And they've been making some moves to try to move up in the draft, probably to get a quarterback. But you got 1 year left with Justin Jefferson. If you don't figure out a deal now and you don't get that ideal quarterback in the draft, I'd be looking to ship Justin and get as much money as I possibly could for him next year. Speaking of the people that the Minnesota Vikings have added, let me go to my big board and tell you about all the folks that have now joined the Minnesota Vikings. You've got an edge, Jonathan Grenard. You've got Aaron Jones, who came over from Green Bay. What's up with moving in division? Like, I don't get it. Sam Darnold as a backup, but potentially a starter. Who knows? Trent Sheffield, Dan Feeney, who is an inside offensive lineman. You've got Blake Cashman. Andrew Van Ginkel came over from Miami. They went out and got some folks. Jerry Tillery, Jonah Williams, John Parker Romo, Jahad Ward, Shaquille Griffin, and Camille Gruger-Hill, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to butcher some names here, but trust me, it is not ill intent. I just can't pronounce all of the wonderful names that we got in the league. And then they let go of Alexander Mattison, which you went and got Aaron Jones. You don't really need Mattison. He wasn't productive last year, so why keep him? So it makes sense that they let him go and let him go sign with someone else. So all of those folks have been added by the Minnesota Vikings. You've got to know that they are not planning to scrap this year. But the quarterback position is going to be a really big factor in that. So if they can move up from that 23rd spot, I mean, heck, they might be able to get someone in the 23rd spot. I don't know a bunch of names that are going to fall that low that I would want as my starter. Maybe the quarterback. You know what? We'll get into draft analysis in a couple of weeks. We'll not get into that right now, but just know that that quarterback position is going to play a huge role for what Minnesota does. But it doesn't seem like, based on the moves they're making in the offseason, that they're trying to scrap this year just yet. Now we're going to move into the Windy City and all of the drama that is probably no longer. Justin Fields is no longer the starting quarterback for your Chicago Bears. And you know what? He may have just stumbled into the perfect backup spot. I mean, the ideal position to be in the NFL if you were talking about being a backup quarterback. Justin Fields is going to back up Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh under Mike Tomlin. What? So you get to go and play this last year of your contract. You get to study under someone who has won a Super Bowl. And despite how you feel about Russell Wilson right now, he has won a Super Bowl and he's a pretty competent quarterback. You get to learn from Mike Tomlin, a winning head coach, someone who can instill confidence and get you to perform to your top potential. And you're probably going to see some time on the field. There's no way that Russell Wilson is going to play the whole season either unharmed or at the top of his game where Justin Fields isn't going to challenge for that spot. So there's a real likelihood that Justin Fields sees the field this year. That's a great place to be if you're Justin Fields. You're going to get a chance to learn, grow, develop, And you get to do it in a place where people actually want you and they're not trying to throw you aside for a number 1 draft pick, who, by the way, I don't think is going to be that great. Whatever, I'm hating, but that's cool. Look, the top story now that Justin is no longer there is it's got to be Caleb Williams, right? Like, he has to be the number 1 overall draft pick. This is why you make this move. I mean, because you're not putting Drake May there. You're not moving Jaden Daniels up to be your quarterback of the future if you're Chicago. You don't want, I don't know, whoever else is out there, J.J. McCarthy. You don't want those folks. You want Caleb Williams, the guy who was a star, who is a star, who's going to be a star. You want that person to be the lead of your franchise. And while all of that is great, it still requires them to build chemistry. You've got some additional changes going on in Chicago. If I'm looking at my big board, you've added Keenan Allen, you've added DeAndre Swift, you've added Kevin Bernard or Bird, you've added Jonathan Owens, you've got Coleman Shelton, Ryan Bates. Who else? They went out and got a couple of tight ends. They got Gerald Everett from the Chargers as well. So him and Keenan Allen both came over. You added some weapons to this offense. Weapons that would have been great to go with DJ Moore and Cole Kmet. And if you still had Justin, the kind of chemistry that they were building in last year. But you don't. So now you've got to learn it all over with Caleb Williams. And you got to hope that he's a pretty quick study. Because if he stumbles this year too, he doesn't get the same leeway as some other first-round draft picks. He is supposed to be the prodigal son. At least that's the way they're painting it. So there's no way that you allow him to stumble. It's going to be everybody's fault but his. So I hope the head coach is prepared to look for a new place to go if this thing doesn't work out. But I hope, for Chicago Bears fans' sake, that the chemistry is able to come together and that they're able to, I don't know, get 8 wins, maybe. I don't know if we're talking playoffs, but they got a whole bunch of weapons for Caleb now. So who knows? They could surprise me, much like the Green Bay Packers did last year. Other than the additions that the Chicago Bears have added to their team and subtracting Justin Fields and folks like Eddie Jones and Cody Whitehair, the Chicago Bears have had a pretty good offseason last year and a solid offseason this year. The changing of the quarterback position could be the one thing that really moves Chicago into a space where they can win. But I don't know if that's actually the case or if we're just going to see the same cycle that we always see with them. You draft someone, they don't work out, you trade them. You draft someone, they don't work out, you trade them. Here's to Chicago Bears fans. This one's for you guys. So, moving on to my Detroit Lions. Let me first say, this first story, or the top story for the Lions in the offseason, is a very unfortunate one. Cam Sutton, someone who we recently signed to a 3-year, $33 million deal, has been released. Why, might you ask, has he been released? He's got a warrant out for his arrest. Something like domestic battery. I'm not going to get into that part because I don't know the details and it's not really the space that we operate in here on the show. But I will tell you, that's a huge loss. Cam Sutton wasn't some amazing corner, shut down corner on an island and you can't throw it his way. Heck, the Detroit Lions secondary got torched. But he was an investment in the position that the Lions really needed help in. And we thought he would be that same investment for the next 2 years as we really build that secondary into something that can actually shut down a receiver. It is unfortunate what happened with the situation with Cam Sutton, but the Lions have to move on. So they released him. He's now not the focus of what the Lions are trying to do. And I can't tell you that he was ever the actual focus once the story came out. There was some confirmation and then he was released. It was pretty quick. The real story here is going to be, what are the Detroit Lions going to do with Jared Goff and Amon St. Brown? Those two individuals are coming up for contract negotiations, extensions, renewals. And because of that, you've got to think about paying these individuals real, legitimate money. What kind of dollar amounts do you think Jared Goff is worth as the starting quarterback for your franchise? I mean, look at what he did for you last year and what he has the potential to do for you. Do you pay him like Daniel Jones, who New York Giants is ready to get rid of, right? Like, is he a $40 million a year quarterback? You got someone like Kyler Murray, who's getting $46 million a year. Is he better than Kyler Murray? Does he provide you more from a stability perspective than Kyler Murray? Certainly better than Derek Carr, and he's getting $38.5 million. So you've got to consider that. And then where do you place Amon Ra? You're talking about someone who is a Pro Bowler, someone with a ton of catches, receptions, yards after catch. He can do it all, right? If you're talking about how you're going to pay him and how you pay Jared Goff, like, you've got a ton of people that are still under contract, under rookie contracts, got a fairly young team, got some folks who are willing to take some pay cuts to stay there in Detroit. But the quarterback and the wide receiver that have really been the cornerstones of your organization over the last 2 years are due for a payday. Please do not short them, Detroit. Do not make them feel slighted, because we don't want to have to build in those spaces. This is coming from a fan and the host of the show. Don't short Jared Goff, and please don't short Amon-Ra St. Brown. Please. Back to the thing that we are lacking. The Detroit Lions realized that, hey, the secondary is not ideally where we want it to be. We gave up a ton of yards all season to big name wide receivers, and we were still able to make a pretty deep run. So they went out and got some folks. They went out and got Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay. They went and got Amik Robertson from the the Las Vegas Raiders. They also picked up DJ Reader from Cincinnati. They got Marcus Davenport from Minnesota, and also went and picked up Kevin Ziegler. But again, we talked about losing Cam. They released Tracy Walker as well. So there's been some additions that are going to help Detroit's defense. And you can tell that's where their focus is. They're focused on improving the defense. There's no way that the Lions want to perform as poorly as they did this year. They don't want that to be the calling card that, hey, we're still giving up a ton of points even though our offense is explosive and can score, right? That's always sort of been our characteristic, but Dan has been changing that narrative, and hopefully he continues to change that narrative so we can really make the push for the Super Bowl next year. All right, and we are going to close down the show with the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay fans, I think I might have said this at the end of last season, but if you didn't listen to the show, then I'll tell you now. I apologize. I really misread Jordan Love. I wanted to support him, but I thought you guys were going to have a very, very tough season. And that wasn't the case. You had a pretty good year, made it to the playoffs, got past the first round. Like, this was great. Like, this has to be looking up if you're a Green Bay Packers fan. And it had to be even better in free agency when you guys signed Josh Jacobs. Two-time NFL rushing leader, Josh Jacobs. Unhappy in Las Vegas, didn't like the way they were treating him, franchise tagging him, the whole deal. So he gets out of there, he comes to Green Bay, they boot Aaron Jones out of there, and now you have a new lead back. And Josh Jacobs is joining a team that is pretty young, like one of the youngest in the league. But with that being said, they've got a year worth of chemistry under their belt, and they just added one of the more explosive weapons in the NFL when he's clicking on all cylinders. Last season, you could say that maybe he sat some games out. Maybe he didn't go as hard as he could have potentially went. I'm not going to call his willingness to work hard into question, not at all. But the way the team was treating him, I can't say that I blame him if he didn't give it every ounce that he had, in my opinion. So now as the new lead back in Green Bay, you can expect him to get a lot of work. Aaron Jones got a lot of work. When he was healthy, he got the ball a lot per game. Josh Jacobs can expect the same treatment. Green Bay, they got a bright future. I'm singing a completely different tune for the Green Bay Packers this year. But they haven't done a whole lot in free agency. They did pick up Xavier McKinney. They also picked up Josh Jacobs, as I mentioned, and a kicker, Greg Joseph. They let go of Aaron Jones, David Bakhtiari, and Devondre Campbell are all out of there. They did re-sign A.J. Dillon, which is kind of cool because he's a fan favorite, but so was Aaron Jones, and he took a pay cut last year. They still let him go this year. But it's all cool. LaFleur is running a tight ship there in Green Bay, and you can tell that he's focused on winning with his group. and not later. He's focused on winning right now. And a couple of different plays from Jordan Love toward the end of that last game, and they could have been moving on to the next round in the playoffs. So they got a really bright future. Still some more moves to come, and certainly some things that they want to address in the draft. But there's no reason that Green Bay isn't looking at going back to the playoffs this year. And for that, I'm excited. And for this season, I'm super excited. And for you listening to the show, I must say thank you very much. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm sorry I don't know what to do with my hands. They're just here and moving around. And next week, we're going to be talking draft possibilities, draft analysis, draft positions, what teams need, and we'll talk about those over the next couple of weeks right up until the draft, which I'm actually going to be attending, so hopefully I can get you some behind the scenes footage of my time at the NFL draft experience. But until next week and until the next show, I just want to let you know, thank you for showing up. This is Headed North. I'm D-Tron. Peace.
Are you still talking about football?
Yeah, Upper Town, NFC, North.
Then let's talk football.